The idea is that a comet collided with the Earth 12.9 thousand years ago and changed the climate, and that caused the collapse of the Clovis culture, and it also wiped out the large megafauna, North American megafauna, the mammoths and the mastodons and the saber-toothed cats and the giant beaver and other whatnot. All these big animals disappeared at the time. Now, so who was here in Flagstaff for the Pecos Conference in 2008, 10 years ago? Okay. So we had a debate. Those were the opening arguments. That's why I said it's the decade-long trial of the Clovis Comet. And before I start, I want to introduce my guests of honor. Three women who have all done at least one thing that changed the course of my life. The first one is Carolyn Shoemaker, who is a local celebrity and a celebrity in the science community. Can you raise your hand? So the thing she did was discover a comet. That was 25 years ago. On March 25th, 1993, if I have my facts right. And David Levy, who the comet is also named after, one of the co-discoverers, wrote this up for Sky and Telescope. And he described this, and it's just a fantastic tale of discovery. They were up on Mount Palomar, the clouds were coming in, they had some fog film. They went ahead and shot the fog film even though the clouds were moving in, and you know, they shouldn't have really discovered anything, but Carolyn was looking at one of the pictures that was being developed, and she said, I don't know what this is, but it looks like a squashed comet. And the reason it looked squashed is because it had passed close to Jupiter, and coming back out in its orbit around Jupiter, it had broken up into a lot of pieces, and on film, it looked like it was squashed. And so Carolyn's husband, Gene, was one of my professors in Caltech when I was a graduate student. And I was in physics, I was also studying earth science, and my professor was Tom Ahrens, who was an expert on impact cratering. And towards the end of my career, Gene came to teach a course on impact cratering, and he is the guy who proved that Meteor Crater, just down the road, is an impact crater. And so he taught a course, and even though I had all my coursework done, everybody said, oh, you have to take Gene's course. And so I signed up for Gene's course, and he led a field trip to Meteor Crater that I got to go on. And in fact, we camped, I believe, at this campsite. But I brought my dog and my girlfriend and a guy who wanted to tag along, who was a musician but had to have a job, so he worked as a technician in our laboratory. And so we drove separately, and I've never told Carolyn this story, I don't think. We drove up to Meteor Crater. We were head of the band that carried all the other Caltech students. And we went up to Meteor Crater to go in and take our field trip down to the bottom. And there was a young woman there taking tickets, and we said, well, we're here to take a tour of Meteor Crater. And she said, we don't just give tours. I mean, you know, and I said, well, we're with a group. And she said, well, who's leading the group? And I said, Gene Shoemaker. And, you know, her jaw dropped. She said, oh, taking a tour of Meteor Crater with Gene Shoemaker would be like taking a tour of heaven with God. So the second guest of honor is my wife Yvonne, and she changed my life by saying yes when I asked her to marry me. And that has a direct connection to the Pecos Conference. Because I came to the conference 4 years ago in Mancos. And one of the talks that impressed me the most was Don Simonis talking about the pair of eclipses over the moon house. I think he's here. I saw his talk earlier today. And so I wanted to follow up on that. I went and looked at the NASA website and saw where the eclipses crossed. And I decided I have to go there, and I want to go out there on the anniversary of one of the eclipses. And I was trying to get people to go and trying to get people to go. And Yvonne agreed to go with me. And a whole group in October of 2016. And I wanted to be there to see where the rays went as the sun tracked across where it was during the eclipse in the 13th century. And so after the rays cleared, and she watched me taking pictures, and she patiently waited, I asked her to marry me. And I gave her a piece of the Chelyabinsk meteorite as a wedding stone, which is way better than a diamond. And the third person is my mom. And so, does anybody know when the Pecos Conference started? What year?
1927.
1927. Well, that's when my mom started. Her birthday's next week. And she's been coming to these for maybe 30 years. So now, I don't know how many minutes I have left, but I can finally get back to my... Okay, good. Because I don't want to keep people away. I don't want to come between you and your beer, because I know that's so I was visiting my mom in Broomfield, Colorado, the house I grew up in, 10 years ago, and her Pecos newsletter came, and she said, oh, look at this. There's going to be a real interesting talk in Flagstaff at the Pecos Conference about this comet idea. And I thought, oh no, because I already knew about it, and I was a skeptic, to say the least. And so I contacted the organizers, and I asked if I could have maybe a rebuttal, and they said, well, we can do better. Well, we can have a panel discussion, and you're welcome to be a member of the defense team. And so we had a panel discussion, and it was 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. The night before, the prosecution team gave a couple of lectures at NAU that I attended, and so we had a back and forth with the Comet prosecutors, but I was one of the Comet defenders. And so I showed up, and I was delighted that Carolyn was one of my, was one of my debate team members, as well as John McHone, who's a geologist and an expert on impact cratering. So now I'm going to go into my defense, and maybe I'm going to be a little bit more like a late night television host, because I'm going to do the top 10 reasons. So we had 2 hours of lectures and 2 hours of panel discussion, and now I'm condensing all of this into now probably 6 minutes. And it's dangerous to have a top 10 list, because I have to get all the way down to one, and everybody knows that I only have a few minutes left. But I should give you my Twitter handle. It's @Mark Boslough, because I've been putting threads up on my counter arguments over the last week or so, because there was an article that came out in Science News a month or so ago, and so I thought, well, I want to bring everybody up to speed. So the first 3 of the top 10, of course, I'm going to start with 10 and count down. So the first 3 are my first objections when I first heard about this. Number 10, extreme improbability. So I actually went through and calculated the probability that a comet, so the comet team, the prosecutors say, well, the comet broke up, it exploded over the ice sheet, but it was in multiple pieces, it didn't hit the ground, it came in at a very shallow grazing angle, and if you put all that together, you get a probability of 1 in a quadrillion that this would have happened during a period of time, and it would have had to happen to cause this chain reaction effect. And the way I look at it as a defense attorney, if you took this into a court of law, that's like saying the suspect poisoned the victim by putting 1 pill of poison into a bottle of 1 quadrillion pills, and the victim took that 1 pill. It's extremely low probability. It's not impossible, but it shouldn't happen on the age of the universe. Number 9, physical impossibility. So that would be, so one of the things they suggest is that this large comet either broke into a million pieces and exploded all over the Earth, or was just one piece and came in and exploded at very, very high altitude. That neither conserves physics nor momentum. So going back to the courtroom for, whoops, don't want to lose that, my dear coupons over there. So that would be like a prosecutor of a murder suspect where you know the caliber of the projectile. Okay, I have 4 minutes. 8 more. The caliber of the gun was smaller than the caliber of the projectile. Physically impossible. Inconsistent story. In some versions it's a comet, in some versions it's an asteroid, in some versions it's a broken comet. It could be an impact, or it can be an airburst, it can be an ice sheet at different locations. Some locations are in the St. Lawrence Seaway, some are in the Great Lakes. Now there's one in Greenland that's a candidate. So that's like a prosecuting attorney saying, well, the murder weapon was a knife. No, a gun. No, a rope. No, a blunt object. No, poison. So the next one is lack of evidence for a crime. In reality, there wasn't a simultaneous extinction. You actually, if you're going to accuse somebody of a crime, the crime actually has to exist. But the last mammoth did not die at that boundary. In fact, there were mammoths in Alaska 3,000 years later. There were mammoths on Wrangel Island something like 7,000 years later. So the crime that the comet is being accused of did not actually exist, at least that part of the crime. Lack of time control. Vince Holliday from University of Arizona has done detailed analysis to try to reproduce where that boundary is. In fact, he just published a blind study in PLOS in the Open Access Journal. And when you do a blind study, the evidence or the claimed evidence does not actually line up. Sometimes it's above the boundary, sometimes it's below the boundary, and Vance has some very strong criticisms of the time constraints. So that was Lubbock Lake. And here's a quote from Vance: "Accurate, precise, and direct dating of the claim zones with purported evidence is non-existent." Okay, and the next one, number 5, evidence that is not evidence or evidence for something else. So markers are not diagnostics. So the proponents use the term markers, but there are certain diagnostics of impact. Carolyn Shoemaker defined some of the first ones at Meteor Crater, high pressure phases of quartz. That's how that crater was proved to be an impact, because that only forms under very high pressure conditions of an impact. Nothing like that has been found at this boundary. So the comet is not responsible. Evidence that has been refuted. So one of the points of evidence is Lonsdale hexagonal diamonds. A very well-known, well-established crystallographer has not been able to identify Lonsdale, and he suggests that what they think is Lonsdale is actually a different crystal. It's graphene. It's a different type of carbon. Now, there's another one, and that is these spherules of carbon. 1 minute left, and I have to go. Okay, spherules of carbon. There was a group that identified or showed that these were misidentified. They were actually insect fecal pellets and fungal sclerotia. So as a defense attorney, you probably remember, if glove don't fit, you must quit. And I was trying to think of something. If it's just bug excrement, you gotta quit. Evidence lacks, some of the evidence lacks confirmation even by the own team, by the prosecutors. They haven't even confirmed their own work. Contamination evidence. I got one of these little carbon spirals. I sent it to an accelerator mass spectrometer laboratory in the University of Arizona. The date came back 200 years. So that little pellet did not come from the right time. It can be evidence of that impact. And finally, lack of openness and disclosure and sample sharing. It's been really difficult to get samples, especially after I showed that one of these little carbon spirals. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you to acquit the comet of all charges. So, if it's just bug poop, you must acquit it.